Evening. Thank you everyone for coming and anyone who's watching. We're going to do sort of the panel first, and then after that we'll open it up for questions and answers. So if you guys have anything I'd ask that you hold them to the end, and then we'll have ample time for that. I want to thank everyone for coming. I'll introduce you briefly in a second, but I want to thank everyone for coming. So we want to talk a little bit about diversity in local elections tonight in Washington County, and we're going to focus this obviously on what we're doing here, and obviously we may talk a little bit about, if we need to, state and national issues, but we're going to talk how it impacts locally, and that's really what we feel like we can influence. I think we all agree that we want politicians who are the best qualified people to lead, but we also want to make sure that we have a very diverse, whenever possible, that those people are diverse and represent all the citizens of the county. Right now, currently, most of our elected officials are white, male, and Republican. So, not that any of us are against white males or Republicans, but we want to have a very diverse and sort of representative board of commissioners, Board of Education, City Council, those types of things. So one of CAP's long-term priorities is to improve diversity among the local officials and increase voter participation. And really looking forward to 2020 and beyond, that is one of the things we're trying to do, is get folks, good candidates, and support them that believe our core values of ethics, education, the economy, and also whenever possible are diverse, so that we can have a representative sort of elected body. So having said that, I'll introduce briefly everyone, and then we'll get started. At the far end, I'll start down there, we have Harry Jones.
Hello.
Harry is, and please, everyone correct me if I'm wrong on anything, but Harry's a former Marine.
Yes.
Harry ran until, ran for county commissioner. Great guy, postal carrier.
Thank you.
I'll let you kind of go with more than that later. Donna Brightman, former Board of Education president, I believe.
Yes.
Also has run for county commissioner just this last year.
Twice.
Yes. There you go. Andrew Barnhart.
Just saying.
Andrew Barnhart, who ran as a state delegate, correct, as a Green Party candidate. And you're a professor at Frederick Community College?
Yep, adjunct professor of philosophy and biology.
Okay. And then Sandra Oblitas, who is the founder and head of the Kasandra Cultural Center, correct? And her daughter Flavia. Flavia, I'm sorry. So, okay, and I'm going to start out with this. I'd like to ask each of you to give any more background that you'd like to give on yourselves that I didn't just give. And, you know, what part of the community you live in, what background do you have in public service, and do you feel represented by the current local government that we have? I'll start with Harry.
Okay, my name's Harry Jones. Like he said, I 6 years in the Marine Corps. I'm a citizen of Hagerstown. I was born and raised in Hagerstown. I grew up in Jonathan Street area. Left, joined the military. I come back. I decided to run for the state police and then also the post office at the same time. So I took the postal service because it was paying more money. So after years and years of looking in the community and watching who was running for offices, what they did, I decided to give it a shot because my community was basically underrepresented. They just bypassed several communities, and in order for the average person to be involved in politics, you have to have your elected officials and your leaders be within the community so that they have an ear within that community. And that's one of the reasons why I chose to run, was because I felt Hagerstown and Washington County wasn't being represented well enough. I live downtown Hagerstown. Downtown Hagerstown has a bad name, but people and the folks that live downtown are great people. And that's another reason why I decided to run, to try and make my community just a little bit better each day, each month, each year. And you have to have great quality people like Donna, okay? And I know, things they go back and forth, but there's a lot of great people in this community that their voices aren't being heard. And that's why I decided to run, and I will run again just to make sure that we are heard. And you need more diversification and more women, more students. I mean, at the age of 18, they can run. Okay, we have smart individuals in Hagerstown. We really do. But we've got to get out and we have to contact them. We have to reach out to them. And I think most of our elected officials here, the last several elections, they just went and did their own thing and decided not to pay attention to their communities.
Okay. Donna?
Sure. Sort of just to keep going with Harry's theme, and the reason we're here tonight is the underrepresentation of certain segments of our county and our community. And quite frankly, back in 2005, that's why I got started in politics. I felt that the Board of Ed at that time was elected at large. There was no one on the Board of Ed from South County. I'm not sure there was anyone from Hagerstown at the time. And Hagerstown, about 27% of the schools and school population all reside in Hagerstown. So to sort of cut to the chase so I don't take up too much time, at that time with redistricting, where I live in South County was actually part of Frederick County Legislative District with Rick Weldon. Chris Schenk was a delegate as well that represented our area, and they introduced legislation for me to allow the Board of Ed to be elected by district rather than at large. And I can remember the day that Rick called me and said, by the way, at that time, the president of the Board of Ed, Wayne Ridenauer, and the superintendent at that time, Betty Morgan, went to Annapolis, went to the committee chair, Sheila Hickson, who Betty knew personally, and talked her into deep sixing that legislation. It never got out in a committee hearing. No one was ever able to speak about the lack of representation from certain areas of the county. And I can remember Rick Weldon calling me and saying, are you mad enough to run? And I said, well, what do I run for? And he said, well, either Board of Ed or Commissioner. And that's when I decided to run for Commissioner in '06. Lost that election, 25 candidates. I came in 6th in a 5-way race, which I did this time as well. This seems to be my number. And then I was appointed to the Board of Ed and served for 9.5 years on the Board of Ed. So if there's anything this community and this county and the folks in this room could do, is to try to figure out how we wake this county up to the need of a more diverse representation.
Thanks. Andrew?
Yeah, so I only recently really got into politics, and I decided to run for state delegate mostly because a lot of my background and what I have been doing as a disability activist and a disability advocate has been sort of at the state level. I've previously testified on various pieces of legislation that went before the state, House, and Senate committees. In fact, I'll be going down to Annapolis again on March 8th to talk about the Developmental Disabilities Administration budget and talk before senators, state senators there. So my political background, at least in Maryland, is a little bit more of the state level rather than local. But still, I felt like I had an obligation to run for some kind of office, especially considering that in the races that the Green Party, who I am affiliated with, in those races that we went in, there were simply races that it was only the Republican incumbents and no Democratic candidates. And for us, we see that as that's not real, participation in democracy. And if people, are clearly not going to be represented by one party, or even by two parties, at least from a third party standpoint, we want thriving discussions about policy related issues. And we wanted, and I wanted to give people a choice. more than just, hey, check the box for this person and then, go on your merry way to the next, person on the ballot, right? So I wanted to give Washington County a different choice than what they were usually sort of presented with. And even with the Green Party, the local Green Party chapter for Washington County only starting up about a year ago, we put up a record number of candidates, and I got about 12.5% of the vote. I think that's a really amazing showing for a party that only just started a year ago, and in a Republican area too. So I think that's wonderful, and I see discussions beginning to happen more and more about policy too. It's just a matter of how you engage with people. And of course, as someone, if we're talking about, do I feel that the county government or the local government represents me? As a white male, of course, I'm fully represented. As a young person, I don't feel that I'm represented as much, and I think a lot of young people, of course, don't really feel represented in local government. We talk about students, should be more politically active and be included more in the kinds of political discussions. As someone who has two brothers with disabilities, and the reason why I'm a disabilities advocate and activist, clearly I don't think on that side that the government is representing those concerns and those affiliations. So on those counts, and of course on the third party perspective, little to no representation. So I think that there is, of course, a lot of room for improvement in terms of representation, and it'll slowly get there, but it'll take a lot of time and a lot of patience. And I think that as long as these kinds of conversations keep happening and continue to happen, we'll get there.
Okay, thanks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandra Oblitas. I come from Bolivia, my country. I arrived to this country in 2002, and I'm classical ballet and folkloric ballet by profession. And I'm decided to open the doors from Kasandra Cultural Center in this city, Hagerstown, in 2010. And our center is dedicated to promote our Latin American countries through dances. We used to teach classical ballet, salsa, Caribbean dances, and specifically folkloric and native dances. Our center used to organize galas, annually galas, and this year we are going to organize our fourth gala at the Hagerstown Convention Center. That's what we used to do. And since last year ago, we decided to promote more our countries, not only Latin America. We decided to open to more countries like Europe and Asia too. And this year we are going to call more countries like Arabia, Russia, China, Germany, and our Latin American countries as well. Our goal is invite our children from this community to be part of our culture, knowing more, about our countries, and helping, to these kids to be healthy without, dancing and learning more about this culture.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to ask a series of questions. Some will be directed at specific folks, but some will just be for the group. This one's going to be for the group. So for anyone who wants to answer this, whoever wants to go first. So what do you see as the effects of having, here in Washington County, a lack of diversity, from your personal experiences, a lack of diversity in local elected officials? And the second part of that is, do you feel like your concerns are being heard by the current elected officials? And this isn't a loaded question to kind of bash anyone, it's just to try to get sort of the root of it. So anyone who wants to sort of go into that.
Is that all right?
You're fine.
So, again, when I think of underrepresentation, I think of barriers. And when I think of barriers, I think of political barriers, I think of institutional barriers, and I think of cultural barriers. And there's a lot of overlap. It's hard to put everything into just one of those categories. But to your point, let's look at ethics. Let's look at corruption. Let's look at some of the issues that came up in the last election campaign. And what I saw in the results of the campaign, or the election, not the campaign, is a lot of status quo. I'm not sure who will be the voice for the underrepresented. I don't know where that's going to come from. I don't know. I know there's a diversity commission that the commissioners set up just before the election. I don't know if that's going to be reporting out in a public way. I don't know what the agenda is. So the question you're asking is significant. It's an important question. It's too early in this government's administration. I mean, they've had what, 4 meetings maybe since they were sworn in. And I'm not sure where it's going to go at this point. But I do know that elections have consequences. I know that this county chose to go in one direction. I'm not sure at this point what a group like CAPPAC or the people in this room, what we can do as advocates or activists to try to push this agenda or this conversation beyond this room. It's a great question. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else?
Well, for in terms of diversity and the lack of diversity and what kinds of effects that might have, there's a whole host of them that you can sort of imagine, sort of going off of what Donna had said about, the kinds of barriers that there are. With diversity, there also has to come, this inclusive aspect to it, right? There has to be this kind of open dialogue, and there's a whole host of real practical opportunities that have to come with it, right? I'll be convinced that the local government will, really do a lot to enhance diversity when, say their diversity commission will, create real practical opportunities for those who are not necessarily heard to be heard. How that will happen, again, remains to be seen. But when, say, diverse communities or people who are affiliated with different groups, when they are able to have some kind of either political control over their environment or material control over their environment, when they are able to express their emotions in a way that is really heard, when they are able to exercise their practical reason in a very meaningful and impactful way, that I think is the kind of ideal standard that we need to shoot for. How, when you have that kind of lack of diversity, when you have that lack of affiliation, that lack of control of either political environment or material environment, when you have that lack of being able to freely express your emotions and your senses, imagination, and thoughts, it detriments and it takes away from people's overall well-being. So that, we're talking about really people's well-being here when we're talking about a lack of diversity, ultimately. So when you promote more diversity, of course, you will see more well-being or a more flourishing kind of society. So hopefully, we'll get to a point where diversity and inclusion are a real tangible part of it, where people have practical opportunities to be and do what they want. But right now, it's a lot harder when you just simply don't have that diversity available.
So Harry and Kasandra, I'm going to hear you guys sort of say this, and let me reframe it somewhat. So, and my numbers may be a little bit off, but in the current Washington County, or fairly recently, I think about 10% of the population is African American and about 5% is Hispanic, roughly, and it may be off.
Right, you're up to about 11% African American and about 7, a little over 7.
So, I mean, it's not the majority, but it's still a fairly sizable, they're fairly sizable demographics. So I guess as a follow-up, and I'd like to ask you two this, I mean, what do you see in the African American community? And I'm not asking you to speak for the Latino and the African American community, but like Harry, like you said, downtown, you know a lot of folks downtown. So it may even be just the city, folks who live in the city. What do you guys see as a sort of if anything, what's not being met by not having any diversity in candidates? I mean, do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I understand where you're going. It's more of inclusiveness. They're not being represented. Their voices aren't being heard. With any community that is on the verge of budding and starting to grow, you get your aches and your pains. And when your leaders don't listen to that because they're, I don't want to say Republican or Democrat, it's just that the majority rules. And I know everyone here notices that in Washington County, the majority rules everything, so everything goes one way for 4 years. And then this is just me. But the other communities are being forgotten about for those 4 years. Well, here in the last 10 years within Washington County has been really growing. And you have a lot of folks that are coming in from out of town, they're moving here because it's cleaner, it's better for their families. And each one that I talked to along the way, or even when I was running for commissioner at the time, the first question to me is what are you gonna do to make our communities safer? What are you gonna do to make our communities more inclusive? And along the way, and I got to thinking about it, you literally have to take a pause and you have to say, okay, being where you're at in this community, is your community growing? Okay? Do you see other parts of the community lacking? What are they lacking? Okay? They're lacking healthcare. They're lacking education. They're lacking fire and rescue. Where it would take 5 minutes to get to the south end of town, it might take 20 minutes to get to the north end of town. And I noticed the community changing where they started moving different fire departments around, you know, trying to better fit the community. That was a start. The education level has really risen in the last 6 years. I'd say roughly 6 years. I mean, because we've got better quality teachers that are coming in and they're willing to help your families, your kids, and try and better educate them. What I noticed with the diversity part of it is me growing up in the Black community, growing up through Jonathan Street, I was fortunate. My parents pushed me to make sure that I was a better person, to make sure that I really got out and got mentors. And I think that part of it has went by the wayside. You have different factions of different organizations that are trying to develop the community, but I don't think anyone's talking. And that's what I really tried to push when I was out running for county commissioner, is that, okay, I noticed all these organizations that are here to help, but no one's really communicating enough. And I think that's the main cause of some of the issues here in Washington County, lack of communication.
So do you think, just as a follow-up to that, do you think, and anyone else can chime in on this as well, but based on what you just said, do you think that it's a lack of, whether we're talking city or county leadership, do you think they're not listening? Or do you feel like maybe it's just a lack of communication or, of information that it's maybe not, any issues from our community are not maybe getting back to them, or they are hearing them, they just maybe don't understand them.
I beg to differ sometimes. I think they do hear, but they're not listening because they're looking at, I don't wanna say a bigger picture, they're looking at their agenda.
Okay.
Okay, and I think they're pushing that agenda for that 4 years or however long it is. And what I mean by not paying attention to your community and not listening to your community, we had that for the last 2 elections. These elected officials, they had their own agenda, they didn't think about their community as a whole. And it all come crashing down right at this election. And this time around, I think the people of Hagerstown and Washington County, I think they were tired, and I think they were paying attention. I know they were paying attention, because every house I went to, they had 10 questions or more.
But did they vote?
We'll get to that.
Okay. Did they vote? Yeah.
I think they would have if the weather would have been right.
Okay, no,
Okay.
I'm serious, all right.
Seriously, I really
Okay.
do. And then towards the end, you know, the politics got involved, and people decided, oh, nothing's gonna change. And this is where you guys come into it, okay? Talk with your neighbors, find out their issues, okay? Write them down, get it to your representatives. We're changing things right now because we're having night meetings for county commissioners. I never thought it would happen, never, okay? So some are listening. And the old boy system, I think it's done. I really do. I see the change. I was involved in the change. Donna was involved in it. We were pushing pretty hard. And
We were ahead of the.
we were ahead of everyone. Yeah. And I truly believe after this election and what transpired, I do believe that you're gonna see diversity come in, and it's gonna come in pretty fast. Okay, because the folks in Washington County and the Hagerstown area, they're awake. They still talk to me about, how can I be involved? How can I get involved? And I ask, what's your issue? I wanna make sure my children have a safe place, a good environment, and get educated. Okay, everything else comes in afterwards.
But why will the Black community and the Hispanic community, and I hate to put it that way, because I like to think we were all one community, don't get out and vote?
Yeah, you just read my mind. I was gonna go
I've struggled
to
with
Sandra
that
for that
for
as well.
several
Yeah.
election campaigns, and I've reached out to all the communities, and
Yeah, that was,
So
It's
how-
a
I'd like-
tricky question, it really is, because when you get out into the community, like my community, your community, even your communities, okay, and you're talking to folks, and they're very upbeat, they're like, yes, I want change. And then
But
you
they
go,
don't
you
turn
go
out.
back 2 weeks later, and you say, okay, within that 2 week, this is what I did, within that 2 week time frame, what did you experience?
Harry, not to cut you off there, but I'd like to hear Sandra's, background, because you run the Kasandra Cultural Center. You, obviously, you talk to a lot of folks, whether they're Latino or non-Latino. What do you think about everything that we're talking about here?
It's very interesting when when I open Kasandra Cultural Center, I'm start just working with Spanish people. And through the years, I've been seeing another cultures are interested to learning about another and our culture too. But talking about that you are talking before, I think we need more information about health, about what more possibilities our community would have in case they are became citizens, for instance. A lot of people, they are just residents, and we know if we are just residents, we don't have opportunity to vote. But we need more information about that.
Yeah.
For
and-
offer more possibilities they can have in
So-
case they.
So that information, what would be a good way to get that information to the folks that you're talking about?
Offering in some communities, more information about through the schools, for instance, through the children. sending flyers, you know, motivating to the people to become, the first step, become citizens, the person are, you know, if they are just residents. And in the paperwork, we love to you know, to read, especially when we start to learning English. We need to learn it, and we used to read, you know, information about the schools when the, you know, the public schools send us paperwork. We used to read. Through the schools, for me, is the best way for send information to the parents. For other way,
One thing I've also learned is that the average person in the community, they really don't know who the representatives are.
Right.
If they have an issue, who do they contact? Do they know where City Hall is located? Do they know where the Commissioner's office is located? Do they know where these informational centers are? And I noticed that a pretty good amount, really, they don't, because the knowledge isn't being pushed out to where they can find these avenues to where they can get possibilities, or where they can get their learning skills, or even jobs. You know, a lot of folks around town aren't on the internet. They can't afford to be on the internet. So, like you said, where's those informational centers at? Are they being told about them?
So these are good points, and one of my follow-up questions later is gonna sort of talk about the voters and what we need to do about getting information and voting. But Andrew, I'd like to kind of spin back here. I mean, so you represented a third party, and obviously this is a nationwide thing, state thing, issue, but also here at the local level. I mean, really it's a one-party system. It's the Republican Party, but you know, the traditional two parties are what we're dealing with. You as a third party candidate, what do you feel like a third party can bring that we're not getting right now? Whether it's Green Party, Libertarian, anything else, I mean, from your perspective.
Well, third parties have the advantage of providing perspectives that are obviously beyond what two parties can offer. You also have with say even in a two-party system or a two broad big party system, what often happens is that with this two-party system, you end up with with a big tent party, where either Democrats or Republicans, they try to expand everything that they can in terms of their policies, in terms of their platforms, in terms of their views, to try and get as many people to fall within that kind of tent of theirs. And that often, at least from a third party perspective, we see there's a lot of inter-party conflict, right? You see, you know, certain sectors of the Republican Party, you know, fighting against each other for dominance and for control within the Republican system. You see the same thing oftentimes within the Democratic Party. So for us as third parties, we say, you know, we ought to have, you know, different parties, more parties involved that can sort of narrow, you know, close those different tents a little bit, so that people who feel a little bit more affiliated with particular values or particular, you know, ideas can come together and, you know, talk about that and, you know, work on, you know, pushing their ideas. Of course, there's a double-edged sword with this, right? The double-edged sword is that you may end up with more sort of hyper-partisanship, but for third parties, we see this as a way of helping to foster more dialogue, right? You know, and so that it doesn't just become, you know, like say, two dominant big, you know, football teams, sort of like, you know, sports, where the way in which we talk to each other, you know, across party lines is mostly kind of like how you would advocate for a particular sports team, right? It's our team, go team, win all the time. Right? Instead of coming together and doing this kind of dialogue and working together in terms of things like coalitions and doing coalition building. So for third parties, you know, moreover, having a third party, whether it's libertarian or green, or I think now in the state there's a new socialist party. I think that recently got approved by the Board of Elections, the Red Roses Party. but even whatever the party may be, whatever the third party may be, it's offering new policies to the two big parties. I mean, you see this like just to revert to the national level. I mean, you see some of the Democratic Party implementing, trying to push forward a Green New Deal, which has its origins within a third party, the Green Party. So we provide different ideas for parties to look at, to analyze, and see, just is this the kind of direction we want to go? Is this, what we offer a different perspective that is desperately needed? Because otherwise, you end up with a kind of political stagnation almost, right? Where nothing really gets moved forward in a way, right? And of course, this becomes even worse when it's, as you mentioned, like a one-party system within the local area, right? It becomes, Republicans are really sort of focusing on their tent. They're focusing on the factions within their tent and trying to make sure that they appease the different factions within their own tent, right?
I'm gonna have to stop you,
sure.
sorry, but I got some other stuff I want to get to. These are all great points, appreciate it. Okay, so now I'd like to talk to Donna and Sandra and get your perspective on something. And this is, if anybody else wants to chime in, but specifically, let's talk about elected diversity among women. Okay, so right now there are no women on the county commission. There have been a few scattered over the years, but none right now. We do have a few women on the city council in Hagerstown, and there are some on the Board of Education. However, the Board of Education's, I think, all Republicans. So I think, is it not? Predominantly though, but there are, that's right, there are a couple, but that's beside the point. Donna's keeping me in check. Yeah, no. But my point is, you can see across the board, we still, getting women elected to local office is kind of in line with what we're seeing nationally. We don't have as many women, although it is starting to be a trend, we don't have as many women elected to local office. So my question is, after all that, how do we get more women to encourage more quality women to run for office, and then how do we get them elected? And that's for Sandra and Donna initially, please.
Sandra, you want it, or you want me
Go
to?
ahead.
So there's an interesting dynamic, a man wakes up in the morning and he said, I think I'll run for office. Okay. A woman wakes up in the morning and goes, I'd like to run for office, but I better check to see if I know what I'm talking about. I need to be sure that I have all my ducks in a row. I better ask my partner, my spouse. I better check with my children. There's a whole different mental dynamic to a woman deciding to run for office and a man deciding to run for office. Maybe that sounds sexist to you, but I see it happening time and time again. Women tend to be harder on themselves as far as their qualifications to run. So in this county, just to give you a story, I was told once that instead of talking, stories seem to hang with people longer. When I ran in '06 for commissioner, there were 25 candidates. There were 2 women running. Dory Nips was the Republican incumbent. She got primaried by her own party. So after the primary, there were 10 candidates, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and I was one woman of 9 men. And I came in 6th, as I said, and I was walking down the street one day, ran into Chris Shank, who at that time was a delegate, and he said, damn, you ran a good campaign. If you had had different anatomy, you would have won. Okay. I don't know whether it's a rural issue where there's a lot of very conservative Christian, evangelical Christian, conservative Catholics, where it's very paternalistic. I think that's certainly a part of it in a rural county like this. I think Washington County is like 270 some years old. We've had 3 female commissioners in that period of time. Linda Irving Craig, Dory Nips, Ruth Ann Callahan. 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and I will just say that Linda Irving Craig was the top vote getter, and historically the top vote getter is the president of the county commissioners. She was convinced by her other male counterparts who won that she really didn't have what it took to be president. Ron Bowers became president and she was allowed to be vice president. So there's a cultural issue, whether it's rural, whether it's Washington County, whether it's a combination of many things, but I don't know what, I mean, Tim Rowland wrote an article after the last election and said if you won't elect the 2 females that ran because whatever reason they were qualified, then why don't the Republicans put forward a Republican female? But the problem with that is you're still the same person, whether you have an R by your name or a D by your name, or so. How many people after a last panel I walked out of, Democrats have come up to me since I ran and said, why don't you run again as a Republican? What sense does that make? I mean, help me with that one. Same person, but you have this litmus test. So again, I don't know what that answer, I think a lot of the old people are gonna die off and a lot of the young people come in, sorry. But I think it'll change generationally over time, yeah.
So Sandra, just as a, from a different perspective, so the other 3 folks here have run for office, but you are a woman. You run your own, you're in the community, you have a lot of contacts, you run your own community center. Someone like you, what would it take to get someone like you to run for office? Because, I mean, you seem like, I mean, you have a lot of things, not you necessarily, but someone like you, or, I mean, to encourage someone like you to run for office and get elected, whether it was city or county.
Personally, I would like one day see a Spanish leader too, in the front.
I didn't want to go there, but please go there. Yeah.
No, I'm culture, my area is 100% culture. But I would like to see one day in America one leader, a Spanish leader, or that same community we need to encourage to the ladies. Sometimes we believe more. We used to work in the home. We used to go outside. Prepare more. Our basic, not problem, but our basic stuff is the language. If we have more, encouraged for learning English and prepare more about politics, for instance, yes, one day we can have a leader and helping to the ladies, and not only Spanish, we can see a lot of abuse for ladies and to families, and that is keeping silence is incredible.
Yes.
We can see for different ways exist a lot, and obviously that follow kids too. Making abuse from the parents or one of the parents, and I think definitely we need to encourage to the female. Don't worry if we are Spanish or not, for pushing to go outside to try to be leader and try to, how can I say? To demonstrate we can do exactly the same thing like you guys, you can do without our homes,
And
Do you feel like, I'll get to you in a sec, Harry, because you're next anyway. Do you feel like, Amy sort of mentioned this, and this is not just for women, but for the Latino community, do you feel like the maybe since English is a second language for a lot of Latinos, do you feel like that maybe is in the back of some folks' minds that, well, maybe I shouldn't run for office because of the language challenges? Do you think that that's a serious issue?
Primarily, yes. We need to, that is the first step where we sometimes, including me, oh my God, the language, I need to prepare more, I think. But in my area, for instance, I had the opportunity to work with all kinds of persons. It's very interesting because I'm starting to work just with Latinos. And now I've been seeing how from other cultures coming to learning about our cultures, from Africa, Chinese, from other areas in India, and that time when we are going to represent the country, for instance, Mexico, and they wearing like Mexican costume, that time when they are dancing, they became from the area, and they try to represent very proudly, and that means we are, encouraged to the people to learn in another cultures too. But definitely the women, we need to be, working hard for be leader like you. My respect, Donna. I love to see ladies like you. We are, ahead, and it's beautiful. My big wish is try to see one day Spanish leaders one day.
Okay,
Don't
thanks.
worry if they are Republicans or the other, no, one is, but I'm the contact, I'm sorry.
So Harry, thanks, Sandra. That was a great input. Harry, I know you were getting ready to say something. I'm going to dovetail into you. That didn't come out right. I'm going to transition to you anyway. So whatever you want to say, go ahead. But I also wanted to ask you from the African American community, same sort of thing. How do we perhaps encourage more African Americans to run for office? And additionally, how do we try to get out the vote and get more of the African American community to come out and vote? Because I think that that is a growing population, or growing demographic that we have locally. So how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. I'm a history buff. My parents told us, make sure you know your history. So then when you get older, then you'll understand it better when you get out into the public or you decide to run for public office or be an educator. And Washington County has a bad history, a really, really bad history. So some of these communities have been, I don't want to say oppressed, but they have been left behind for so many years. The mentality of those communities are like, is it going to matter? Are we going to make a difference? And I myself, being taught by great parents, I don't look at anyone's color. And that's amazing. From 6 of us. And my brothers and sisters were older than me. They came up through the civil rights. They came up with the abuses within Washington County. And by me being younger, I had to endure it also. I had to watch my brothers and sisters go through it. And yes, it had an effect on them, but it did not change them, okay? They came up through, they lived here in the county, they branched out, they went in the military, they got different jobs, and they made something for themselves. And they tried to teach other individuals within the community to either stand up, educate yourself, okay, and be inclusive, no matter what it was 50 years ago, okay? Open your eyes, see the world around you, see your county. Your county is changing, okay? There are great people. Yes, you have to remember your past, but you also have to remember progress. And that's where you have to go into those communities as a leader, as a councilman. You have to go into those communities, and yes, it may be a Black community, it may be a Hispanic community, but go in maybe as an educator. Maybe your councilmen and women, maybe they're not branching out to those sectors of that community to see what their needs are. And that's what I've seen in the last 8 years that I've been thinking, are you gonna run, Harry? Are you gonna run? Are you gonna run into politics? That's what I was looking to see how public officials were getting into the communities and trying to figure out what the community's needs were. And by me explaining why I feel those communities are being forgotten, is because once they got elected, they never really truly went back to those communities and took their information that they got from the community and applied it. Me being a black person, okay, I have to be aware. To this day, I have to be aware when I step out my front door, what am I going to endure throughout the day? It shouldn't be that way, but everybody is aware of it, they know it. And it's not, I don't want to say it's not a prejudice thing, it's just a thing to where I believe we've improved. I believe we really don't look at one another that way too much. But depending on what community you're in, within your community, they're gonna look at you that way, okay? Me being a black person, I talk to individuals, they're like, why are you running, Harry? You know nothing's gonna change. And I explain to them, in order to get change, you have to be willing to make change. There has to be someone that's willing to step out there and say, hey, if I can do this, so can you. And that's what we have to do as a people. We have to go back into those communities, our communities, and say, hey, what are the needs? And then we have to educate folks to bring those to the forefront. Push on your elected officials and say, hey, we're here. We don't want to be forgotten. Washington County has came a long ways, but I truly believe it hasn't got to the inclusiveness part by a long shot. I mean, you can go from South County, you can go to the Hancock area, you can go almost up to Emmitsburg, Frederick County line. I ran into some awesome people. I know a lot of people. But the folks that I ran into, they all have the same issue. And that issue is not being heard. Whether it's dealing with their property taxes, fire and rescue, dealing with just the basic needs that they feel that their communities lack.
Harry, that's great. I gotta stop you though, because I wanna get to one last question so we have time for question and answers. That's great. But what you just said is a great segue to the last question that I wanna ask, and this is for everyone and anyone who wants to answer it. So how do we get, at the individual level, how do we get voter turnout to go up? And you sort of touched on that. It's actually very in-depth. You gave a good answer on that. And also the second part of that is, what can CAPPAC do to help ensure that we try to find and endorse and support diversity in candidates, as well as help get the vote out? And this is for anyone who wants to.
I think it's more of an informational thing, getting the information to the people, educate the people, whether it be by literature or whether it be by showing them what their community has. Because a lot of folks don't realize what's in Washington County and Hagerstown. They don't realize how rich we are. And I tell folks that all the time. This is one of the richest communities around if you apply yourself, if you have the potential. Because someone's watching you every day. Find a mentor and latch onto that mentor, and you will see, greatness here. It is a great community, but the information is not there. If you don't have employment, who knows where to go to the unemployment office? Who knows where to go seek different things to get you back on your feet? I know we see a lot of the homelessness around there, but are they truly homeless? We don't know, because stop and ask. Take the time out, know your neighbor. And that's what I really pushed for when I ran for commissioner. Know your neighbor, find out their needs, and then you can better serve your community by talking with your elected officials, making them aware.
Thanks.
So back to my original comment about barriers. So structurally, primaries in Washington County are a barrier. As we saw in the last election, any Republican who made it through the primary won. Okay, and you have that flipped in other counties in the state. Montgomery County, Baltimore City, if you win the Democratic primary, you win the general. So there's a flaw in the primary system, whether we can, which will never happen, but to CatPac or any other, it would be great to have an initiative to have open primaries. Appointments, I don't know if any of you remember in the last election cycle in 2014, we had over 7 appointments by the Republican Central Committee in this county. That means we had elected officials who had not been elected making policy in this county for 3 years, 3.5 years, and they were not elected by us. Just recently, I heard a current commissioner who was just re-elected may be applying for the town managership in Hancock. If that happens, that opens up that seat to another appointment by the Republican Central Committee, and we'll have another person setting policy in this county who was not elected for almost 4 years. That's huge. Redistricting is coming up in 2020. Populations dropping in Allegheny and Garrett County. And the reason that affects Washington County is those legislative districts will have to move east to pick up population to do the one person, one vote. I think it's 150,000 or whatever, don't quote me on that. But you're gonna see our districts changing. South County, where I live, used to be joined with Frederick County. That could happen again. Redistricting is something CatPac might want to track. People may want to track. That could be significant. Not to mention whatever changes come out of the courts for the current 6th congressional district. And the idea that party affiliation is the beginning and the end of everything, and that's the new litmus test, whether it's Democrat or Republican. I don't know how we find our way through that one, but how do we convince people it's about qualified candidates, not your party affiliation? And the big tent thing, I agree with that, because it's the 2 major parties' way of including and trying to keep third parties and independence and innovation from happening. So,
Good.
okay.
And one more thing to add on to that, maybe you guys might need to look into looking at all the different committees that have opened up within the county and city government. Find out what those committees are, and try and find folks that are willing to sit on those boards. And there's a lot that has opened up in the past 2 years.
Right.
You have your ethics, you have just a wide variety of them, and people aren't aware of them because the information's not coming out. But look into that, and like I said, there was 12 of them that I looked into, and anything from EDC to your welfare programs.
Right.
Okay, there's positions there, and you can get people involved into that. That's policy change.
Right.
You
Good.
know, that's one thing.
Okay.
That's probably the smartest way.
Yeah, you're almost embedded then.
Right.
Right. Andrew?
If you
You've been
want-
quiet for a while, you need to talk.
Yeah. If you want to talk about politics and talk about political discourse and having, say, like for me, a third party voice being a little bit louder of a voice, and if you want something different, one of the big complaints that we get as a third party is you spoil the elections for either the Democrats or Republicans, and so you don't want to hear from us, or we get ignored for that reason. So one of the big things we say is we should not just, of course, in the general election, but perhaps in the Democrats and the Republican primaries, have ranked choice voting, in which you list the preferences of your candidate, right? So if you like a Green Party candidate, you would put them down as your first choice. And then if you want a Democrat, you put them as number 2, Libertarian as 3, Republican 4. And that way, in case, say, the Green Party candidate may come in last for the seat, right? Those votes get reallocated so that to their second choice until there is a clear majority winner. Yeah, 50% plus one.
Yes.
Yeah,
That is
plus one
actually
vote.
one of the things we're looking into. believe it
Yeah.
or not, yeah.
So we, in the Green Party ourselves, we use that system for voting on candidates to go to the state party, positions for, within our party or for president, for governor, whoever. And we find that using that, we actually have, more constructive dialogue, because then it's not, candidates attacking each other, and it's more better constructive dialogue about positions or policies and so on and so forth. And if you have, say, ranked choice voting within, say, just the general election, you could have, better, discussions about policy and about the candidates and their positions than it is about really, say, party affiliation. Because then you could say, well, the Greens and Democrats can come together and talk more about, different kinds of positions and not have to fear each other when it comes to the polling. And that's one big, I think, way that you can help foster more friendly and constructive dialogue within the county itself. If you want to talk about just inclusion in general and not just about politics, one thing I think is often overlooked is play. And not just, say, like having children of from different backgrounds and different affiliations come together and play with each other, right? Because when children do that, what happens? They grow in their relationships with different people apart from themselves.
Not to cut you off, I think we're getting off topic a lot. We want to talk, we want to
Sure.
kind of just figure out about what can we, do internally to try to get diversity, and then what can we also do to get out the vote.
Sure.
So is there anything?
Well, I mean, for instances like whenever you host like an informational session, right? It could be perhaps a combination of, information and maybe play, right? Because when, people do that, they, again, build relationships, and you start to think about things from a different perspective.
Okay.
And then, as part of, just not giving people information about, how to vote, where to vote, et cetera, you're also fostering, in a way, relationships and dialogue that's a little bit different from just the traditional sort of give me the facts only.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So that's just an idea, a small idea, but maybe it would help, and it would be a different way of approaching the issue than what is normally done.
Gotcha.
Right? So that's just my point for that.
Oh, good stuff, thanks. I'm just trying to keep us moving along because we're getting short. And Sandra, you get the last word, and Flavia, if you have anything to add, I'd like you to go after your mom if you have anything for the entire discussion.
Would be great, create more maybe inclusion and diversity programs, especially focusing on our children. I've been seeing we have a big population about obesity in children. Would be great, more diversity areas where the kids will be, active all the time.
Wellness.
And health is automatically, because if they are going up sick, or forget it when they are adults. If they start to have with diabetes, for instance, at 10 years old, it's sad, because you can imagine when they have 20, 30, it's sad. I think for me it's very important to be focused about our children and create a lot of diversity areas to do, but like programs like when they have at that school, like math or very important, stuff, to do about sports, dance, and all kind of fitness for children. For me, it's the best.
Great, thanks. Flavia, do you have anything you want to add to the discussion? Okay. So Daisy, do you have to leave now, or do you have a few minutes? Can we do questions and answers first, or do you have to go now?
I can wait.
Okay, so let's go ahead and open it up. Any questions? We got a few minutes. Yeah, Heidi.
Yeah, well, so I
think everybody here knows that there's this sort of dominant, casual, racist, old white guy dominance in Washington County, and I don't think people call it out enough. I mean, it's really toxic, and it's really bad for economic development because, you know, no one wants to do business with a nasty racist community, and that is a pretty dominant feel that you often get from our elected officials, unfortunately. And I think people should call it out more, and I don't think they do. So I don't know if CatPac wants to be involved in doing that, but I think you need to call a spade, and when people say nasty racist things in the paper and run their campaigns with sort of hidden, you know, playing hidden race cards that are not so hidden, you need to call it out. I don't think it happens.
Not to be pedantic, but did you have a question, or was it just a statement?
No, it's a statement,
Okay.
sort of. I mean,
It's a statement and a question, and I understand where you're coming from. Like I said, you have to be aware of Washington County as a whole. Okay?
I mean, we're the town where Willie Mays got, you know, really badly
Exactly.
treated.
Exactly. So how do we overcome that? We overcome that through education, forcing your leadership to recognize those things. They want a new sports complex here. Force the name change. If they're going to do a complex, what is the complex name? What's the name that should be on that complex?
Or, for
You know,
example, like the new elementary school, it was named, instead of after Pennington, you know, probably the most illustrious person that came out of Washington County.
Right. Exactly.
You know, it was named for the plantation he escaped from.
Right.
I mean, this is appalling.
And-
We need to not do that sort of thing.
You're absolutely right, and it comes down to educating the people. It does. Okay, the younger generation, and I'm caught right in the middle. Okay, I'll be 54 years old in June. The younger generation, they understand that. They don't want to fight. They don't want to argue. What they want to do is they want to succeed, whether you want to look at it or not. If they want to succeed in electronics, if they want to succeed in not doing anything at all, how are we going to reach those kids? Okay, how are you going to reach me, the people that are 50-something now? The best way that you're going to reach me is you're going to show me. You're going to stand up. You're going to say, hey, enough is enough. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get as much information as we possibly can to show the public that this doesn't go on any longer. And you don't have to fight them. You have to educate. Because I've tried it. I've tried your way, honestly. I'm a history buff. And when they started about the sports complex, I said, what's your first thing? The first thing is, what are you gonna name it? Oh, well, we don't know. Name it something historical. Willie Mays, okay? Do you realize how many people would visit Hagerstown because of Willie Mays? We have some great sports people. We have football players. We have baseball players. We have musicians here. Washington County is full of musicians, okay, whether it be jazz, blues, rock. It's all here, and you know why they don't stay here and play? It's because exactly what you said, okay? Oh, you're gonna make too much noise. We don't have a place for you.
We should name it the Rodney Monroe Complex. See how many people know what the Rodney Monroe Complex is.
There's a lot more,
Which would be a minority thing, and ACC's all-time leading scorer played at Goretti.
And hey, look, we're talking about play.
Right.
Exactly. To Andrew's point, I gotta keep it, I wanna make sure we get to anybody who's got questions. Anything else? Kara?
So at the State of the County a few weeks ago, during the question and answer, a gentleman stood up and asked a question about having essentially districts for county commissioner seats as opposed to all at-large seats, which is what we have now. And it followed a question about diversifying the board in general. And the commissioners seemed pretty opposed to that idea.
Of course they are.
Because
They want to defend themselves.
Well,
themselves.
okay, I'm not trying to bash anybody, but I am curious, I guess, about what those of you on this panel think about that idea in terms of first of all, the efficacy of actually bringing diversity to the Board of County Commissioners, but also the practicality of getting something like that to happen in the county, given the resistance from the current board and from previous boards.
So this, may I,
Please do.
so this sort of comes to the commissioner form of government versus the charter versus code. There's 3 forms of governments allowed in Maryland. And there have been, I think it's gone to referendum twice and failed. Frederick passed it 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and went to a charter form of government, wrote the charter, and I think they have some form of regions or districts within their commissioner. It's now called a council race, and you have some at large and you have some representing certain zip codes. Board of Eds have done it all across the state. So are there models that work? Absolutely. Since we're a commissioner form of government, it would have to be legislated. Even if you didn't go to a charter discussion, which would probably fail again, you would have to get one of the Republican delegation members to sponsor the bill to put that through. So that's another barrier to any kind of change right now. I think that is the key to opening up this county to innovative, thoughtful, inclusive government, and it's probably the single biggest barrier we have.
So you think, leaving aside the difficulty of actually having it happen, it would work?
I think there are enough models out there where it's been very successful. Again, a contiguous county, Frederick, has been very successful. They're very progressive, and I don't mean progressive politically, but growth and economic growth and moving forward, good education. They have a good track record with diversity and so forth. So I think it's a great model. I don't know, again, whether there's enough spine. We may have to do some spine transplants in this county to get that moving forward, but I think it would be great for not just the commissioners, but for also the Board of Ed.
Time for one more if we have anyone else who has a question. Okay, before we close out, Daisy, Daisy is a friend of Sandra's, and she has sort of a public service announcement she'd like to make, so why don't you come up here and tell everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Sure, wherever you're comfortable.
All right. Yeah, good evening, all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for having me tonight. My name is Daisy Davila. I'm from Ecuador. I've been to the United States of America for 19 years. My background, I'm studying law in my country. My father was a lawyer. He became a judge. Also, my 2 sisters too, and I too. Well, my passion is, when I became here, I tried to get my dream. Like always, I dream of America. And since I be here, I try to open my companies. I start to open, like I say, construction companies, and I involved with the community, with the Spanish community. And since that day, I feel touched with them to understand the barrier of the language they don't speak, and also the immigration status. They need to follow up many situations that the government don't understand, unfortunately. And since that, we've been growing with my family, we become investors. And they have an opportunity to be served to the community. And at that moment, when I worked directly with the social services and also with the Mission of Mercy, I feel like it's a big gap in the government. They don't realize the Spanish, and they not just only not the Spanish, the whole world, the living in the United States of America, need help. And at that time, create my nonprofit organization, Help Women Victims of Domestic Violence. And this is my organization, Family Go.
Do you have some of these you can leave for people?
Yes,
Okay.
some of them. I've been working through the core systems 2 days a week, being my volunteer myself with my team, and without charge any dollar amount.
I'll leave them up here for anybody who wants them.
And then I'm gaining credibility because we follow cases within attorneys. We provide attorneys pro bono, and then like I said, we help with the process of domestic violence. We help with domestic violence cases, disorder, a protector order, and through the divorce cases. Until we're working also with another organizations, and then we let them try to help them in order to be free out of the domestic violence circles. Well, my purpose right now is to focus with the children's, because the children's are the future of this world. And my plan is open another office in here in Hagerstown. That's why we want to invite all of you, because we want to have a huge event. We're working together with Sandra in order to promote, to grow more my organization. Because the children's, like I mentioned, is the future, and we are here to think out of the box. And we can do it if we unify all of us, and we're working together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to thank, to wrap up, I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank everyone who's watching. I want to thank Ken for setting up a mini discotheque here. So it's pretty good, all the audio. But I also in particular want to thank the panelists, and just to share this briefly with everyone. Harry, I know, he's a postal carrier, and he was running, doing a lot of stuff today, so he had to run to get here. So I appreciate that. Donna lives in South County and had to drive up here at night.
Visas, passports,
You know,
getting across that border is tough.
Just saying.
Just saying.
Andrew, I'm
And the
sure you
roads
had some
washed out.
challenges coming up through, because I know you work at FCC, so you had to get here, probably fight that 70 traffic.
Yeah.
So that was good. And most of all, Sandra, I don't know if I can share this or not, but Sandra teaches, is it the classical?
All kind of dances.
But
The best therapy, guys, for being relaxed and healthy is dance. You are invited to learning all kinds of dances, tango, salsa, all kinds of dances, including ballet for adults, like therapy too. And we are in Hagerstown. I'm working right now currently in my own studio, in my private studio, and right here is close. I will give it to you right now, my small flyers, and you are invited, guys, to come to enjoy with us. And I hope to see you for our gala. It will be on August 24th at the Harvard Hall Convention Center. And May 19th, Sunday, I'm going to support 100% this noble cause, because it's very important, like I told you before. I've been seeing a lot of women passing for really bad times. And obviously the children are watching everything. And we need to help and support this cause.
what I wanted to say mostly, and thank you for all that, what I wanted to say mostly was, when we were setting this up, Sandra teaches this evening, and Sandra canceled her class to be here with us tonight. So what I'm trying to illustrate is everyone here that came in made a little bit of a sacrifice tonight. So I really want to thank everyone for doing that. And we really, Citizen Bipartisanship loves having you here, and we really appreciate it. So thank you. So we have the room for a few minutes. If anybody wants to stay and mingle, please do. And thank you everyone for coming.